Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our continued chapter-by-chapter coverage of Game of Thrones. Today we're talking about Catelyn, chapter number 5. But before we do the recap, I just want to acknowledge that we've been firing on all cylinders lately. We're doing George R. Martin all the time. Tuesdays are still our curveballs, but lately we've been finishing up our Fire and Blood coverage over on Patreon, which is talking about the House of the Dragon source material, which is still George R. Martin, but it's an assembled history of everything that happens with the Targaryens that is then dramatized by HBO. And we're doing Game of Thrones at the same time on Fridays. And that has been real-time narrative, which at some points feels a little slow because we've read these books, we've seen this show, we know these events.
And by comparison, the history in Fire and Blood is so like plot point, death, birth, death. Like it goes very quickly.
And those chapters have been so good.
Right.
They've been such an incredible use of that form, which is so different and risky. And I think this form can be risky too, if things are too glacial, if they don't feel interconnected enough. But I really love getting these two extremes at the same time, because in this chapter, basically, there are people on a road, then they're in an inn, and then someone shows up to the inn.
Right.
That's nothing. That would be maybe 8 words in Fire and Blood. Well, it wouldn't even be acknowledged.
It wouldn't be acknowledged.
Unless someone died, right?
Like maybe the very end of this chapter would be acknowledged, but it would be so quick. But this was also so fun to read because even though not much happens, there's so much character work happening. There's so much world building happening. And I had forgotten totally about this moment in the story. I had completely forgotten about it until the very end of the chapter. And I was like, oh yeah. And it was so exciting. And I feel like I understand Catelyn more, especially after what I want to dive into in our discussion. It was so much fun, even though it feels so wildly different from all the fun in Fire and Blood.
And we talk about adaptation a lot. I think in those Fire and Blood episodes over on Patreon, a lot of that discussion is about what could make it to House of the Dragon and how you would play certain eras of history, certain characterizations. And Game of Thrones is just, basically it's House of the Wolf, because almost every chapter is from the Stark perspective.
That's true, yeah.
We never go, so far we haven't gone more than one chapter in a row that isn't from the Stark perspective.
Yeah, right.
We have one little deviation, then it's straight back to the family. But I love that these moments of characterization can accordion out. And you can have a really satisfying chapter where plot-wise almost nothing happens. And I think that's why it makes it difficult when we talk about the adaptation process in Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon, because you don't know where they're going to find those moments to do that character work.
Right.
Maybe this, we talked about the other day on Patreon, one of those chapters, maybe this could be a whole season of the show. And then another chapter could be maybe 3 episodes. But it's really in where you find those nuggets to develop character.
Absolutely.
And I thought this was one of the most fruitful nuggets we've come across yet in a Game of Thrones. So should we jump into that recap?
Yeah, let's do that. If you want to catch those Fire and Blood discussions, they're on our Patreon, patreon.com/secondbreakfastpod. They've been so much fun.
That wasn't just an ad. I thought it was germane to this discussion.
No, it was. These
but it
things
was
overlap.
Also an ad.
Yes, that's who else is going to do it? We got to do it. Okay. Sponsored by you, the patrons. Okay. Anyway, viewers like you. Anyway, so this is Catelyn number 5, A Game of Thrones. Obviously, spoiler reminder, we have read and seen everything, and we are going to spoil a big thing that's books only in this chapter. So keep that in mind. If you haven't read past this, you're going to be spoiled by something. Okay. So Catelyn and Sir Roderick are on the road north back to Winterfell. They were back in King's Landing doing all the stuff with Ned and talking to Peter Baelish and shit, and now they're on the road. So they're near River Run, which is where Catelyn grew up. And Catelyn has a moment of reflection. She's reflecting on her childhood and
a chapter of reflection.
Yeah, right. And she wonders, okay, I'm in trouble. We're trying to figure all this shit out. Should I seek help? She thinks about going to her father in River Run, who's really nearby, or do I go visit my sister at the Vale, also nearby? And she decides no on both counts because her father is kind of too old to really take any bad news. She's worried that it'll kill him, I guess. And then she decides she can't go visit Lysa because it's too dangerous to take the road to the Vale with only Sir Roderick for protection. So she says, okay, I'm just going to go straight home. They stop at an inn for the night, and they decide to pretend to be just 2 random travelers, a father and a daughter. They don't want to draw attention to themselves. And as they're getting there, Catelyn looks around, and there are a lot of men at this inn. They're all kind of on the way to the tourney in King's Landing. That's what they've seen, lots of travelers heading that way. But none of them, even though she knows who they are, none of them recognize who she is. So that's good. And so they're eating dinner at the inn, and everything's going fine. And who walks in but Tyrion Lannister on his way down from Winterfell? And she's like, oh, shit. And so she's panicking. And he eventually spots her. And he's like, Lady Catelyn, what are you doing here? And, you know, she, remember at this point, still thinks that he was in charge of the plot to kill Bran. And so she kind of like takes a second and decides to like, you know, risk it. And she looks around and she looks at all the swords in the room, all the men who have swords. And she says, hey, your house, whatever, you support House Tully, right? Oh, you over there, how are your men doing? Like, she basically reassures everybody in the room that they are on her side.
She reminds them.
She reminds them, like, you guys are all loyal to House Tully. And they're like, yeah. And she says, she demands that they all arrest Tyrion for his plot against Bran. And she says, we're going to take him back to Winterfell to await the king's justice.
She's flexing on them.
Absolutely.
This is not a kindness.
No,
this
no,
is
no.
saying you are honor bound to support me. And I'm going to, basically, I'm going to get a blank check. I'm
Yes.
going to remind you that you're completely honor bound to follow me, and then I'm going to drop this accusation so you have to act on it.
It's absolutely perfect.
It's quite the power move.
Yeah, it really is. And she's got to like make this quick split-second decision. She's like, yeah, I am Lady Stark of House Winterfell. Remember, you last saw me when I was Catelyn Tully, a river run. So it's the right move. This is so Catelyn, right? Because Catelyn is smart and makes the right move. But she has the wrong information. And so this is the wrong move, obviously. Capturing Tyrion is absolutely the wrong move here because Tyrion was not behind this plot. But she thinks he was. And so she thinks she's doing the right thing.
I don't think it's the wrong move for her.
Well, I just think that like her capturing Tyrion and then like pitting the Lannisters against the Starks is not a good move right now.
I think they already did that. I don't think she's adding to that disdain or hatred.
But but there's no reason to capture Tyrion because he hasn't done anything wrong, and it's a misguiding.
For the information she has from trusted sources, I think this is the right course of action.
Sure, yeah.
We know that she's wrong, and you know how much I love Tyrion, but I think she's doing the right thing here. Like, imagine in another world if her and Ned didn't have kids. When they get called on by Robert to come to King's Landing and be the new Hand of the King, imagine if she got to go with him. And they didn't have people that their enemies could go after their kids, like they already did with Bran. Imagine if she was in King's Landing with Ned. I feel like Ned would never have been beheaded. And we could have seen...
Yeah, I know. She would have been so helpful. Oh my God. Like you're so right.
The way she assesses this situation and deploys this power move, I would have loved in another life to see her pitted against Cersei in the capital.
Oh, that would have been so fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, she'd still have a bit of a learning curve like Ned, but I think the two of them together in King's Landing, based on this chapter, could have been formidable.
Right. And I mean, look at how Catelyn does in the wake of Bran's attack. Like, once she kind of comes out of her shock and her trauma, she like figures out what's going on and she makes all these plans. She figures out, okay, Bran was thrown. This is a plot. The Lannisters did it. Like, she's really smart. And she'd be so helpful with Ned.
And even the difference in the way she interacts with Littlefinger versus the way Ned does.
Yeah.
She's got a weariness that I think serves her. I mean, she survives longer than he does.
Yeah.
She's also sort of outfoxed in the end.
And with Littlefinger, she, like, I think she has a bit of a blind spot because she, like, trusts him maybe a little too much. But I think she's also, like, leaning on, like, using his affection for her to her advantage.
Sure.
Like, oh, please help me, Peter. I need help. You know, that kind of thing. She's not being that, like, that's an extreme version. But she's doing some of that with him, too. Yeah,
she has a scrappiness that I think Ned is a little too stiff for.
I think you're very right about that. Yeah.
So I know we each have a big thing to jump into with this chapter. I was interested to see how long the recap was going to take.
It's real short.
It is, but I think the meat on these bones is where we're going to find a lot of this discussion.
Definitely.
I have something. If you'd like to jump in.
I would love to jump into what you have.
So spoilers for everything after the Red Wedding in the books. If you haven't read it and you don't want to know, here's your last chance. All right, that was your last chance. My thesis, I'll drop it at the beginning and then build to it like I do. This chapter is about Lady Stoneheart.
Awesome.
Lady Stoneheart, I'll develop it through the thing, but basically she's the resurrected form of Catelyn Stark after the Red Wedding. Throat is still cut open, all raspy, kind of undead, not really Catelyn, kind of something else.
Yeah, and this, I haven't read far enough into the books to have read Lady Stoneheart. I know about her because Cam just told me about her when he was first reading the books, and I was like, oh, really cool. I hope they do that in the show, and then of course they didn't.
When they were getting to that point in the show, where that would have happened. So after the Red Wedding, season 4, right around that time, Lena Headey, who played Cersei, posted on Instagram, and she didn't post on Instagram that much. She posted a picture of a bunch of little rocks shaped to form a heart.
Oh, Stoneheart.
And people were taking that as like confirmation. So they kept waiting for this to pop up in the show. And it didn't. And we don't know still. I mean, Benioff and Weiss, I have the utmost respect and pity for them because they signed up to do an adaptation. And the first 4 seasons where they were adapting source material are fantastic.
Right.
And I have nothing but sympathy for everything they had to do after that when they were flying blind, when they were flying without a parachute. But they maybe didn't know how important Lady Stoneheart would be, or they had to cut it for this reason or that reason. But in the books, she is only increasingly relevant and important and alive.
Cool.
And it looks like whenever we get Winds of Winter, I mean, she's like a formidable antagonist by that point.
That's so
She's
cool.
actively trying to kill some main characters.
So cool.
So an incredibly relevant character. And I wasn't expecting to get whispers of this resurrected character until pretty close to the Red Wedding, because she's a character hell-bent on revenge for the Freys and the Lannisters, and she just strings up and hangs anyone who betrayed her family or was in any way responsible for or involved with the Red Wedding.
So cool.
So I was expecting to get some hints and clues and nuggets around Storm of Swords. To my surprise, the first sentence of this chapter begins what I think we're opening the couplet here. I think we're beginning and planting the seeds for Lady Stoneheart in this chapter.
Very exciting.
It starts with the conversation of death, which we've had in the background, kind of rumbling through every single chapter.
It's always there, yeah.
It's the conversational subtext. It is the things like the White Walkers. It is all of everyone's house words are somehow foreboding language about death.
Sure.
So that's already baked in. But Catelyn riding uncovered on this horse with her hair hung wet and heavy, she's ragged and wild and doesn't care about anything. That immediately evokes Lady Stoneheart for me.
Okay,
and that's the first 2 sentences. That's what she looks like, because her skin's all gross because she like washes up on the side of the road.
Oh, and as Lady Stoneheart, not here. In
so she's kind of drowned and her skin is all white and she still has all the wounds from the Red Wedding. So I'm reminded of that here. And she doesn't care and she's not really human. So her appearance is very similar to how Catelyn is here.
Nice.
But also when all of these memories start to cascade on her of her childhood, of this inn that they're approaching, and she describes the innkeeper as a woman who kept eating these weird, like, bitter sour leaf or what, I'm just picturing like chewing tobacco.
Yeah.
It stained the woman's teeth red. So Catelyn is remembering this woman and calls her smile a bloody horror.
Yeah.
Which feels like a good description of a reanimated corpse who was chopped up at a wedding.
That is true. That is what Lady Stoneheart is. I like that.
Totally. And I love that it's Catelyn almost accidentally embodying this future form while remembering the things in her past that conjure up the same image. It's like she's haunted by and confronted by these memories as she's retracing these steps back home, kind of fruitlessly. And I love Les Mis. This whole chapter was like empty chairs, empty tables.
Okay.
But I think it's also a woman who is a sentimental mother trying to protect her kids, trying and failing to go home again. She doesn't want to be away from Winterfell, and that is her uneasy home now. But her retracing these steps of her childhood, if you've ever moved away from the place you've grown up and then gone back there for any reason, it is really strange.
Yeah.
It can be bitter and unreal. The changes feel impossible. The place will look unrecognizable, and then you'll see one little feature or store or monument or something that you recognize, and everything comes washing back. And it's being just swung in those opposite directions. It's melancholy. It's strange. It's upsetting. And I think those are the journeys. They're such tiny little arcs, but they just fall on you like crushing dominoes. I see that happening to Catelyn throughout this chapter. And I think it's a lovely deviation. She's getting some breathing room, basically, from the sullen wooden Stark thing. Because Winterfell, as one big-ass castle in the woods, with snow always on it, that doesn't change. It's a big stone castle. It's not like they're putting additions on the back.
Sure.
It looks the same, and it's covered in snow, and snow always looks the same.
Yeah, and they're all about like remembering the past, like having all the crypts down below with all of the figures of their ancestors.
They're surrounded by their history.
Yeah.
And I think that makes Winterfell unflinching and unflappable. But she's, I mean, constantly, whenever we get inside her head and her point of view, we see that Catelyn is not a natural Stark. Her Tully tendencies are what makes her so interesting. And I love that she's getting some space from Winterfell. She's seeing a world that has changed, and she can clock those changes, but also in remembering Winterfell and thinking constantly about Winterfell and her family who's still stuck there. I think she's finally understanding how forever changed Winterfell is now too. Because even if she could like take a little portal back to Winterfell and walk through it right now, it would feel like empty chairs, empty tables, with all of the family members that are gone.
Sure, yeah.
All the bannermen that are gone. How different and unsafe everything feels now. Never mind Bran falling, which sort of weaponizes all the beautiful architecture because now it hurt my kid.
Yeah, sure.
But it's also, someone got in there and tried to stab my son. So that like, I mean, it's like a home invasion movie that shakes your confidence in your feeling of home. So I think it's almost in what should be this warm Tully homecoming. It more feels like a shattered sentimentality. I think it's the outside world ruining the thing that she needed when she left Winterfell, and maybe the thing that would have buoyed her if she could rally the troops and be surrounded by her family to help her in this time of need. And instead, her family's not there, and everything looks different, and she never feels safe anywhere.
Right, and so then when she becomes Lady Stoneheart, she is like the saddest version of that. She has nobody to help her, so it's just her becoming this monster.
She's trying to find
revenge. Yeah,
she's trying. I mean, if you've seen the movie Furiosa, at the very end when she's confronting the bad guy, Furiosa says, like, give my childhood back to me. Just give the memories back. Give me the life that you took from me. And I think already 5 chapters in, I think that's where Catelyn is, and that's a beautiful preview of sort of the sad quest. I mean, it's brutal and nasty and murdery, but I think that's the quest of Lady Stoneheart, is just trying to reset the clock and change everything back to how it used to be. So at the same time, you get a preview of the future with this Lady Stoneheart thing and constant echoes of the past. There's a beautiful balance to this chapter where we're previewing what will be, anytime any of her kids go back to Winterfell after the end of this series, this is the stuff they're going to go through. They're going to have these like tortured emotional journeys looking at all these spots of, oh, hey, Rickon used to like that spot. Remember Rickon? Like, that's what they're going to go through. And she's going through that. We're seeing that kind of, she's moving up the generational ladder. And we know that that is the future laid before her few surviving children at the end of this series. We're also, of course, seeing Catelyn's own death and resurrection and the terrible, impossible quest that she's going to launch out on when she becomes Lady Stoneheart. I think this chapter, when I call it almost the villain origin story for Lady Stoneheart, I also mean that it fleshes out the motivation for that character who doesn't really talk because she can't.
Oh, right, because her throat's been cut, yeah.
You have to assemble her character from the scraps of words that other people can interpret from her, but mainly just from her actions. And I think this sort of backfills that inability to speak. You get the culture and context of her later revenge mission.
Wow, yeah, I love that.
I was struck by the amount of memories that blow through this journey of basically riding down a road, seeing an inn, stopping at the inn. And just in that like quickie little, what is this, 7 pages?
Yeah, it's a real quick one, yeah.
Flashes of her father, flashes of her kids, memories of her wedding, reminders of Ned's absence, reminders of childhood friends and their adventures, reminders of her living but kind of estranged or absent family members like her brother and her father, reminders of all of her mounting fears and how she used to be happy and be able to take rides and wander, and now everything's scary and might be trying to kill her. Visions of Bran's death, and then possibly finding his attacker.
Yeah.
So the chapter ends with her first, the Lady Stoneheart thing. You can't kill everyone who wronged you, and that won't bring anyone back.
Right.
Like, it won't fix anything.
Right.
And this chapter ends with her seeing Tyrion walk into the bar and thinking, oh, he's the guy who tried to kill my son. So it's the first misled revenge declaration that she makes, and that will become her whole cycle when she's in her Stoneheart era. This chapter, it ends by completing that cycle and previewing the future. It is in microcosm, out of time, or a memory from the past and a preview of the future. I think this chapter is the birth of Lady Stoneheart.
I think that's really fascinating. I really, really like that. And what I was noticing, honestly, is so in line with that. And I think they come together really well. I'm also realizing not only, like you said, like this is like all these things that hinge towards the beginning of Lady Stoneheart, but we even get a, like as foreshadowing for what's to come, but we even get an introduction to the questionable loyalty of the phrase, right? Like there's a lot of talk about the phrase and how, well, they were kind of late to the game during Robert's Rebellion, and it wasn't totally clear who they were going to fight for, and it's never going to be clear. Like there's a lot of talk there, so we're like foreshadowing that betrayal that will create Lady Stoneheart in the first place. But also even when Catelyn points out Tyrion to all the guys to arrest him, she says he was a guest in my house and then he tried to kill my son. So like all of that stuff is there. So I love that. But especially all this stuff you're talking about, Catelyn's reflecting on the past and like her nostalgia moments here. That's what I was noticing too. And my sort of gateway into these ideas was the phrase "if only." It pops up at least 3 times in this chapter, and anytime something like that happens, I want to track it and see if it's doing anything or if it's just a coincidence. Certainly doesn't seem like it based on everything you just said, but we see Sir Roderick say like, oh, an inn, if only, and then they kind of decide they can go to one, but he is hesitant. And then Catelyn thinks to herself, if only her father had been stronger. And then when Tyrion arrives, she thinks to herself, if only the man had lingered at the wall, if only, So there's this wistfulness to her, but she's also again thinking about her past. She's thinking about how young they all used to be, and how when they get to the inn, this innkeeper woman is no longer smiling or offering sweet cakes the way she did when Catelyn was a child, and also her realizing she can't go see her father, she can't go see her sister, and she even has this moment where she's thinking it must not come to war. We must not let it happen, right? So she's like really caught in these feelings of wistfulness, nostalgia, and hope and sadness, like you were talking about. And I definitely agree that the presence of those things is a connection to the Lady Stoneheart thing. I absolutely see that, and I think that's the best way to understand Catelyn's character specifically. But I was sort of zooming out with this idea and thinking it's sort of emblematic of a representational of how all of Westeros is thinking as winter is coming, right? That's sort of been the thesis statement from the beginning, is that things are getting bad and they're going to get worse, right? Because like
the bumper sticker.
Yeah. Like the Stark family is totally divided now. It's like it's totally been dismantled. Winterfell is not the same. We saw Bran thinking about that. We saw Jon thinking about that. We know that like Arya and Sansa and Ned are all down in King's Landing, and that's all falling apart, right? And just nothing is good the way it was supposed to be. And like King Robert is sort of falling apart. He's not ruling the way that maybe people thought he was going to when he took the throne, and everything's just kind of becoming a mess. And so I think and we just have seen things here left and right that things are getting dire, things are getting worse. And of course we're seeing the larger actual winter threat of the White Walkers ever looming and ever present. That every time we go visit Jon, we're like, oh yeah, that's going to happen. And like, I was thinking about that, and I'm thinking, I think that's sort of how everyone's feeling right now. Because part of Catelyn's thing is like, that's part of growing up, is you wish as you get older, you feel like things are harder and worse than when you were a kid, and you wish things were the way that they were, but they're changing, and that's hard. But as winter is coming, like the whole realm is feeling worse and worse about things. And I think it's really fun that you pair that with all of these knights and sellswords and musicians and entertainers and merchants and prostitutes. They're all going down to King's Landing to go to this tourney.
They're migrating.
They're going to this tourney because it's a wonderful distraction. Not only is it literally in the opposite direction of the winter that is coming, they're going south where it's still hot as heck down there, right? But they're also going to like sort of, tune out from reality and enjoy all the fun that is a tourney, all the, the music, the people, the tourism, the games, right? They're just, and people like literally playing at war instead of actually going to war. Like it's this moment where everybody is trying to pretend like the bad thing isn't happening and they're trying to just enjoy the fun thing. Which you see Catelyn going the opposite direction from, and you see Ned actively pushing against. So it's like the Starks, again, they're the ones who know winter is coming, and they're trying to pay attention and not just like pretend like nothing's happening the way everybody else is. So it felt like, I think this is great. This chapter is this wonderful character moment for Catelyn. It's this introduction to and beginning of the Lady Stoneheart thing. And it helps us understand how the realm is feeling and how the state of the world, essentially.
And I like that you can put her in a totally different context here, and she still acts the same. Because there are plenty of other characters who bend or adapt to circumstance in a very flimsy, finger to the wind sort of way. I mean, even the way you said it reminded me, calling those characters the Freys. I mean, the Frey is a funny, it would be like calling them the Fragiles.
Yeah, right.
The Inconsistents, the Shakies.
The Flimsies.
Yeah, exactly, the Flimsies. And I think as compared to that, the Starks are incredibly sturdy. And in that way, she is very much a Stark.
Right.
But like zooming forward to the Lady Stoneheart thing, even that is consistent. It's the same guiding principle that she has now. And if you compare that to the way other characters sort of break, I'm reminded by, I think one of my favorite lines in the show is, I can't remember who it is, talking about Stannis saying, what happens to really sturdy, principled men when they're challenged? They don't bend, they break.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of applies even more so to Catelyn, but I think she's also less fallible, because Stannis is one of many characters in this series who falls prey to temptation and greed and power. But if you look at the shift from Catelyn to Lady Stoneheart, it's not really a change. She's not falling to any sort of temptation or greed. If anything, it's an elevation of that same core principle.
Sure. Of
loyalty and love. Yes, it comes to this sort of monstrous version of it, but at its base, it's obeying the same principles she's always had. It's a quest to avenge fallen or betrayed family and kin, to punish and kill traitors. And I like how that plays into some of our other long-standing ideas and principles. We talked about Sam Tarly as being ravaged by the problem of evil and coming out the other end still good and hopeful, not bitter and cynical, and I'm just, take what you can, leave nothing, whatever that line is. I like that Catelyn is almost that level of sturdy and consistent, where she is ravaged by the problem of evil, and we'll see that continue up until and beyond her death, but I like that her quest as Lady Stoneheart is just to balance the scales. It's an impossible task. We already talked about that. But it is remarkably consistent as compared to the usual story in Westeros of self-interest, of corruption, of nihilism, of just scrapping things for parts and taking everything for yourself. I'm not totally sure I can call her a villain. Before I read this chapter today, I probably would have. And I'm not sure if the word villain even really applies to Song of Ice and Fire.
I was going to say, how do you even have that here?
Ramsay Bolton's a villain. But
sure.
If you could apply the word villain to some of these characters, I don't know if she deserves it. Yes, she does horrible things to people we like, but she feels more to me, and I don't know, I think this is a lot of the George R. R. Martin we've been reading lately, she feels more like a folktale or a metaphor or some sort of populist legend. Going back to the last couple Bran chapters, Lady Stoneheart feels like one of Old Nan's stories. Where she is the poetic comeuppance for people who do immoral things. She is almost an avatar of justice, even if it is twisted and biased, justice in a chronically unjust world.
Well, right. Yeah. Because you don't get this kind of thing in the real world, especially like in a world like Westeros that's meant to be so grounded and harsh. Like you don't get somebody who can supernaturally exact revenge, and yet you get her. So you're right. She does feel legendary and like something from a long time ago.
And maybe that is the playing the long game sort of goal of this chapter. But I felt a totally unexpected wave of sympathy for this character. And in looking at the long arc of Lady Stoneheart, and her body is found after the Red Wedding, and Beric Dondarrion, the guy with the eye patch and the flaming sword, with the, what is it, Brothers Without Banners, his little traveling troupe, and they've got their own religion and magic and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Arya's with them for a minute.
Yeah, and he basically gives his like life force to resurrect her, and then she's on this revenge mission. I think in my memory of whenever the last time I read the last few books was, I thought of her as almost a new character. As yes, we recognized the body, but it was kind of a reanimated corpse filled with this other magical power and desire.
Like it's not Catelyn.
It's the same way I feel about Gandalf the White. Go back and listen to our Lord of the Rings episodes for more on that. But after reading this chapter and seeing that chapter 5 of book 1, this has been here all along, Lady Stoneheart just feels like a version of Catelyn. And it's something awakened that was absolutely already present within her. Back to that point about consistency.
Right.
I feel like this Lady Stoneheart part is there all along. It's not that different from Catelyn. She just has more power and less scruples.
I like that. I'm totally with you on that front. I mean, again, I haven't read Lady Stoneheart, but everything that you've told me and everything I've learned, I think that makes total sense.
An incredibly capable character.
Yeah.
I think Catelyn continues to be maybe the most rewarding POV for a novel. Because when you have an HBO series with such a sweeping ensemble and you have to keep all these storylines straight, and Dany's not going to appear for 3 episodes, so you really have to leave an impression there. And I think Catelyn, there's just not, in that medium, I don't know if there's enough room to do Catelyn with the depth and fascinations that the character contains. It's the same way I think Yennefer is almost an impossible character to portray in anything other than Sapkowski's novels.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
I don't think you could do her well in a show or a series of movies.
Right, and they do Catelyn well in the show. Like,
yes, they do.
Like, like they do a good job with her, but I don't think she's anybody's favorite character in the show, because you have people who are more flashy, like Tyrion or Jon,
but she's so
or Arya
good to watch.
or Dany. Right.
And Michelle Fairley is one of absolutely the best casting decisions in the entire show.
She's fantastic. I can't not picture her when I read Catelyn.
She's so good.
Like some of the other characters I can think past their actors, I can't with Catelyn.
And I think it's an incredible testament to her performance that even within her limited screen time in this big ensemble, I think she contains the multitudes of this character.
Yeah.
In that I can never not picture her.
Right.
Yeah, I got so much out of this chapter. I'm getting so much out of this character, and I'm really enjoying balancing this with Fire and Blood.
Yeah, me too.
It's this immersion, this like exposure therapy into George R. R. Martin. It has rewarded dividends for me.
Definitely.
As a reader.
Yeah, this has been so much fun.
Yeah.
Next week we're gonna see Sansa again. It's been a long time since we've seen Sansa.
Was that Sansa number 2?
I think this is Sansa number 2.
Yeah, because the first one was with Joffrey and them.
Yeah, rough stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that. Also, if you want more George R. R. Martin stuff, like obviously our Patreon stuff we've been plugging, but also I believe this coming Tuesday, we are starting our coverage of season 2 of House of the Dragon on HBO.
So here's the timeline. This Sunday, so this episode's coming out on a Friday.
Right.
This Sunday is the premiere of House of the Dragon season 2. Before you watch the show, you can tune in on our Patreon and listen to the final installment of our Fire and Blood coverage, which we're finally talking about the last chapter of the sequence in that book that will be adapted into the show.
Right.
The chapter's literally called Aftermath.
Yeah.
We've completed the dying of the dragons. Now we have this one little like wrap up epilogue chapter. You can listen to that episode and then roll right into season 2 with us. And we'll, of course, have an episode talking about that premiere on Tuesday.
Yeah, so every Tuesday as the show goes on will be us talking about that week's episode. So it's going to be real Westerosi up in here for the next couple months.
Double or nothing.
And just quick programming reminder, we're not doing Summerween this summer because of House of the Dragon, but we're doing a lot of spooky season stuff in September and October, so lots of horror content will come your way then. But if you're in a horror mood, we've got Summerween from the past 3 years. Go listen to all those episodes.
And
they were a lot of fun.
The last breakfast buffet that we did on Patreon, which is sort of our roundup series, rolling together a bunch of different works of art we've experienced and thought about lately. The last one is a horror episode. It's a female body horror that rolls together a bunch of recent movies.
Yeah, so we got horror stuff. There's horror out the wazoo. If you're on YouTube, we got a whole horror playlist. So go check it out.
Yes,
it's a lot of fun. Cool.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much for listening. Let us know what you thought of this chapter of this discussion. You can comment below on YouTube or Patreon. Send us an email, secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com. I think that's all.
Excellent.
Cool.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. I'm so excited for the show to come back.
Me too.
Awesome.
All right. We'll see y'all soon.
Bye.
Bye.